Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Let's Paint. We're going to do some Halo ODSTs today. So one of the cool things I find about Halo is there's a lot of people that aren't regular grognardy wargamers who have gotten into the hobby because of the Halo IP. So I find that with the painting videos, it's nice to be a little more, I don't want to use the word simple, but not trying to paint to the high tabletop standard, but to just get these models on the table with nice looking paint job. So today what I want to do is go through speed painting on a squad of ODST. So this isn't the full box. This is half the box, 8 models. And what I do initially is I put down a black prime. Now I choose to do this by airbrush. I live in Ohio, so this time of year I can't go outside and spray anything. But with an airbrush, I can always spray. If you don't have an airbrush, you live in a warmer climate, or you have an enclosure that you can get to with a warmed up can of spray primer or spray paint, you can absolutely do this with a rattle can. Base your models in black, and then we're going to put a Zenithal on them, which is just a spray from white from above. Again, I use the airbrush and I spray ink, which comes back to bite me in this process, but I'll address that in the white section, I guess. But yeah, you just put down your Zenithal over the top, just spraying directly from the top down to create some initial shadows from top to bottom with the model. And then we're going to douse them in speed paints. Now in the overall process, when I'm done here, we'll go through getting the speed paint on so that you've got a basic model ready for the table. And then we'll look at applying some basic acrylic paints, do some edge highlighting and some additional highlights across the model to make it look a little more tabletop plus, especially with the 3-foot rule, which meaning if you're standing on the other side of the table looking at this model, it's going to look great on the table. So as we see here, I'm diving in, spraying the black primer across the models. What I will do with each section so that you don't have to watch it, I've got about an hour and a half of actual footage of me painting. So 8 models, probably in about 2 hours total work. So it's a really quick process to get these guys up on the table. I'll break down each section and give you how long the actual section's raw footage was of me painting it, and then what that would be roughly per model. And it'll probably be a little long in comparison to what you'll find in the real world because, believe it or not, recording this does take more time. So let's crack on. Next up, I'm spraying a Zenithal Prime from above. This is, for me, a white Liquitex ink. You could use a white primer, you could use a white paint. Whatever you're spraying with will be fine. In my case, the ink needs a little more time to dry than the primer or paint would have, which comes back to bite me a bit later on as when I start applying speed paints, it starts to reactivate my ink in kind of a way. It kind of mushes up and smudges some of the coverage. Just a fair warning. So now I'm going to dry brush the model. So this is just straight bold titanium white, and I am applying a light dry brush directionally down across the hardest edges of the model. This may seem redundant, but the white paint that you're going to apply is going to be a little more vibrant than the white that you sprayed through your rattle can or airbrush. And this is going to just allow the speed paints to accent those hard edges a little more when you start applying them. So this is a really good step. It's not a necessary step, but I find that it's really worth the while for the result that it gives once you start applying the speed paint. Whether you're going to stop at the speed paint or go on and enhance your edge highlights, it'll give you either nicer highlights with just speed paint, or it'll give you a really good roadmap to follow if you decide that you want to emphasize those edge highlights with standard acrylics. So now I'm jumping straight into Gravelord Gray, and I am dousing the entire model in this. You want to put it on heavy because it's speed paint. You want it to run. You want that capillary action to pull into your shadows to give yourself that gradient and that depth of color across the model. But you don't want to go so heavy that you get weird like title marks or coffee stains on the model. So you'll want to wick away from high points and flat surfaces and ensure that the pooling takes place in recesses around the model. Now, this is where I got a little aggressive and early, and you may see some of the helmet areas, especially where the Zenithal is really heavy, kind of muddy up. That's all on me. You'll want to make sure that you provide your model enough time to sit and cure. Either put a fan on it or a hair dryer on it, or just do all your priming one day and come back to it the next day so that it has proper time to set and cure. Um, that was me trying to rush this out, and that's my bad. But I work around it. I realized it was happening, put them aside, and waited for everything basically to cure up with the fan on it, and then came back and worked on it later. So next up is Grim Black. We're going to use this to apply it to all the weapons on the ODSTs. So any firearms they have. The only exception to this will be the fire break with the flamethrower. We'll make some special exceptions for him. We're going to do that in more of a gray and a green, closer to the box art, without the shark face. But if you want the shark face, let me know. We can always give it a try in another video. Here's where we slow down a little bit. So I'm going to take a cultist cloak and I'm going to apply this to the gloves, undersuit, web gear, all the stuff that's basically like fabric, the boots, just to it's still a dark gray, but it's more of like a dark blue gray. And I wanted to shift the tone of those parts away from the armor so there was some visual separation between them. I don't know how well it shows up in the footage. It shows up much better in person with the model. But this is a little slower step because we're focusing on applying it into those specific areas, and we don't want to overflow into our armor plates and get that to mix, because then you get kind of a ugly blend on your armor plates, and we want to try to keep those just the Gravelord gray, and we want this to be the occultist. We want these other parts, these subparts, to be the occultist cloak. So this is probably one of the slowest steps in the process, just because we're focusing in on those specific areas, taking a little more time with a little more brush control. So real quick here, we're going to switch over to some broadsword silver, and we're going to use this to apply a base coat into the visors of the ODSTs. They've got a very silvery look to their visors in the box art, and I wanted to stick with that. And we'll do a little more to them, but let's get this base down right now. Now that we've got that base applied, we're going to take polished silver and we're going to use that to apply a hot spot just on the front center of the visor, just to make it pop out a little more for us. Also, it's a really good time to hit that knife on the one fire break. I completely forgot to mention that, with a broadsword and then a highlight of polished along the edge. Just yeah, that's important too. We'll take this opportunity to get the base painted up. I'm going to apply runic gray to the concrete areas of the base. We're going to let this go on a little wet and a little sloppy, because in our next step we will wet blend this with the dirt tone that will go for the dirty parts of the base. We'll follow that up with ruddy fur for the dirt areas of the base, and we'll go ahead and liberally let these blend together where the areas meet, and even push some of the ruddy fur into the concrete just to dirty and dingy it up to make it look like a war-torn battle zone kind of place. So this is another slower section for us. I'm going to use blood red to apply some details to the armor, namely in the shoulder pads, knee pads, and chest plates of the ODSTs. I did a very traditional red and blue mix up on my units when I painted my Spartans initially, just leaning into the color of the hard plastics in the box, and the red versus blue series and all of that fun stuff. you can use whatever color or no color should you decide for these little details on your models. Um, I figured with this I'd do half the squad in blue, half the squad in red, and that way I would have some differentiation between the identical units. For example, if I ran double GPs, which I will probably do when I run ODSTs, run 2 of the sniper GPs and 2 of the grunt GPs because it's just how I play. Anyways, much like when we did the undersuit and web gear and all that stuff, this is a take your time, slow moment where you're just applying the paint to a very specific set of areas. So you want to go nice and slow because with speed paint, especially, you don't want to freak out and spill over your lines. You can try to clean it up with a little bit of water when that happens, but then you risk potentially reactivating paint, especially if it hasn't cured yet. So it's just a, be cautious kind of moment. Take a breath, slow down. This is the long part of the speed paint process. This will skew our numbers a little bit, but this section I'm just applying some gunner camo to the chassis around the flamethrower just to go with the box art look. This is a little slowdown because we're painting just one model, this specific color. So it does skew our end numbers, but I mean, I think we'll see as this is progressing that this speed paint is no lie in this case. We are knocking these models out probably about 10 to 15 minutes per model. Anyways, let's move on. So at this point, if you choose to stop with just the speed paints, you can be cranking these guys out in about 10 minutes a pop. So if that is your goal, you can stop right here and you've got a perfectly fine tabletop usable army and you're good to go. Where I go from here is I bust out my standard acrylics to do some edge highlights and some cleanup on these just to make them look a little better. It does add time to the overall speed paint process, and we'll continue to track that just to see how much time it adds. But I also do think that it adds quality to the finished model. If that's not what you're interested in, you've seen here that roughly 10 minutes per model with speed paints, you can get these guys knocked out and on your table really fast. But if you want to push it a little further, stick around and we're going to go through that. So now I'm applying some Pro Acryl Neutral Gray just as an edge highlight to the armor panels on the armor. Just a thinner paint, side of your brush, and just clipping those edges where light's going to meet it just to kind of bring them out and pronounce the details in the armor a little bit more. Now I'm going to add some dark neutral gray just to the edge highlight of the weapons to the same thing we're doing. We're edge highlighting. It's just the way the light's bouncing off the weapon, but we want to go for the darker gray so it doesn't bounce as strong as the armor does. Then we're going to follow that up with just the smallest glints of our neutral gray in some key areas around the weapon, mainly like the harshest corners and edges. Now it's on to bold pyro red to do our highlights on the red areas of the armor. Now, of course, if you've done a different color, you'll want to find whatever acrylic matches best as a highlight to your base color on this model. In this case, I chose bold pyro red. I wanted it to pop a bit because we will do a wash over this later to kind of bring everything back down and unify the tones and take away some of the intensity. So if you go a little bright on your highlight, just know that you can wash it back later and it'll be fine. Here I'm going to switch over to blue black and use this as our highlight for the undersuit, gloves, web gear, the other bits that we did the occult gray on earlier, just to bring those out a little bit so that they're further differentiated from the armor. At this point, I'm going to douse the model in a thinned down black wash. Now, emphasize thinned down. In my case, since I use Pro Acryl, I'm doing 1 drop of black wash, 1 drop of glazed wash medium, and 1 drop of water. So it's 1 part wash to 2 part medium and water. So it's really thinned down. I do this because while I want to use it to glaze and blend back the highlights and kind of unify everything, I also don't want to drench it in so much black wash that the tone goes so grim and so dark that it kind of starts to look muddy and messy. You can do this with most any wash. I know Army Painter Fanatic washes thin really well, and even old Army Painter washes thinned pretty well. They also both have mediums. There's also a speed paint medium you could use to thin them as well. Those are the 2 brands I primarily use, and if you're using something different, I can't speak from experience to thinning it, but I would assume that even if it was just a couple of drops of water to 1 drop of wash, you would still be able to thin it and get a similar result. So at this point, if you've stuck around and you're unsure how far you want to go if you're painting, here is the bulldog that I've just finished working on that you've been watching next to the one that is just speed painted. And you can see side by side the visual difference between the two and judge for yourself which you prefer. Remember that fire break with the flamethrower? We painted it green. We're going to hit that with a highlight of camo green just to pump it up a little bit. Nothing fancy. Still no shark mouth in the front. If you want me to try a shark mouth, comment below. We'll see what happens. So the ODST and the box art have kind of a bluish tinge to those silvered visors, and I wanted to try to replicate that. So what I've done here is taken about 4 drops of speed paint medium to 1 drop of magic blue speed paint, and I'm just going to apply a very thin filter over to the visors of all of our ODSTs. Well, we're rimming bases, so you know what that means. We've come to the end of another Let's Paint. So again, I always prefer black rims on my bases, but the color is up to you, and you choose fuchsia. Hey, that's going to be fun, and you're not going to lose your models on the table. I hope you enjoyed this video today. We see that just speed paint alone, we can start cranking these ODSTs out and onto the table about 10 minutes per model. A little more effort bumps that up to about 25 minutes a model, which in my opinion is still pretty quick and I think worthwhile. I leave that choice up to you, but I hope you found something useful or valuable in this video and you enjoyed the time that we spent together today. If you would, please give the video a like, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, that would be awesome. I haven't done much Halo content lately. I've been focused really heavily on Epic Warpath and the Warpath universe in general. If you're unfamiliar with that, I would encourage you to check it out. If you like Firefight, Dead Zone is a really natural transition as they're essentially the same rule set. You just have a lot more to choose from in Dead Zone due to the fact that it's a bigger world setting than just sticking with the Halo IP. If you're interested in Mantic games and especially Epic Warpath beyond that, I've started a podcast with a group of my friends called Pinned and Broken. You can find links to it on my page, as well as the episodes themselves, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. So you can give that a listen if you enjoy the sound of my voice. But that said and done, once again, thank you for taking the time to join me with this video today. Now let's see how these ODST turned out.